Guys, welcome to part number 2 of the training around pain series, or the programming around pain series, where I've got 7 videos coming your way on the 7 main things that I do as a powerlifting and a strength coach to keep people training, ultimately get out of pain long term, but keep people training in pain whilst they're in pain. Like, how can we train and modify things around this to keep getting successful training in, no matter what? So part number 2, if you haven't already seen part number 1, I highly recommend you go and watch that. It's a fairly in-depth one, where I talk about kind of stability, what stability means, what it actually is, and how it upholds all of your strength and performance goals, essentially. So we're going to move on now to part number 2, part 2 of 7, which is programming around pain, how we track pain, essentially. How we track pain, how we use pain as an accurate and trustworthy data point, and how we use pain as an objective measure as opposed to a subjective measure, because pain can be quite subjective. Everybody has their own tolerance to pain. Everybody has their own perception of pain. What's a 3 out of 10 for pain for some person? One person might be a 6 out of pain for another person. So it's really important that you kind of fine tune this as time goes on. And today I'm going to be talking about how we track pain and why it's so important. And I ultimately want to start this video off by saying that pain it's just a light on the dashboard, right? Your engine hasn't blown up, okay? You do not have to back off completely. You do not have to rest. You do not have to, completely reevaluate your life because you've got shoulder pain, knee pain, or you've torn a muscle, whatever it might be, right? You just have to work in a very smart way through programming and execution, and we're going to cover these in this 7-part series. But yes, it is just a light on the dashboard. It's just information, and how we process this information is one thing, and then how we utilize it is another. And we're going to be talking about how we process the information of pain psychologically, how we deal with that mentally later on in the series. But I've decided just to drip feed things over time. So we'll get into this video. This video is a bit of a shorter one than episode number 1, how we track pain. So I want to make it simple for you to understand, right? And we're going to use what's called rate of perceived pain, or RPP. You might not have heard of it before. But essentially the reason I like to use this is because a lot of lifters are familiar with RPE, right? So RPE, rate of perceived exertion or effort. And they both scale 0 to 10. And I like to use RPP, rate of perceived pain, for a lot of athletes that come to me whenever they are going through some injuries, or whenever I'm helping and co-coaching an athlete alongside like a clinician, physio, chiropractor, whatever that might be. And this is definitely one of the cornerstones to helping an athlete succeed long term, right? So RPP, and this is how we track our pain, right? This is how we track things. And essentially it is a scale of 0 to 10, right? 0 to 10. And I'm going to break down the 3 different sections within this 0 to 10, right? So we have a 3 and under, okay? Which is essentially also known as your entry point. Then we have a 3 to 4, which is also known as your threshold, your top of your threshold, your cap. And then we have a 5 plus, right? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right, now there's lots of different ways we can actually manipulate and use this, okay? The first thing is understanding that it is subjective, and that is completely fine. Like I said, there are some hard motherfuckers out there that can, they've just been through the mill with strength training, and what might be a 3 for them could be a 5 plus for someone else. And that's completely fine. You have to work on your own kind of skill and improve from there. So the rule here, right, with using this is we need to find an entry point. Don't exceed the cap or your threshold. And then we want to see a long-term downward trend of your RPP when we track this. So a couple of examples now to put this into practice and put this into play in terms of how we would actually utilize RPP is, it could be any kind of pain that you might have, right? So if it's your stereotypical kind of inflammatory pains or tendinitis, in around the shoulder or the elbow or the knee, or it could be a little bit more serious, such as like an adductor tear, a pec tear, whatever it might be, right? I've pretty much had all of what I've just said, and went through similar approaches with this with some really good clinicians. But the first thing that we need to do, right, in any way, shape or form is we need to find an entry point, right? We need to know where you can enter into exercise that is a 3 and under, right? On a scale of that RPP 0 to 10, right? So if we have, for example, with tore an adductor, right? And whenever, like for example, when I tore my adductor and I hurt my adductor, I couldn't squat to full depth. And I had pretty much a threshold of about 140 kilograms, 150 kilograms at the time, to the point where it's like, nope, this is going to tear off the bone. Like it feels very, very bad. So I had to find an entry point that brought me to a 3 and under. And at the time it was a high bar squat, which shifted me a little bit more into my quads. It took the hinge away. It allowed me to control my pelvis a little bit more. And therefore I wasn't putting quite as much stress through the adductors. I had to tempo 3 seconds down, which limited the load that I could actually lift. I was beltless, which limited the load. And then I also cut my range of motion. So I was actually stopping like 1 or 2 inches high. And this exercise variation that I was doing brought me to about a 3 out of 10 on pain. Whereas if I went into a low bar squat and I was belted and I was going full depth, I was up towards 6 or 7 out of 10 pain, right? So on the same day. Okay, so this is where we start to look at exercise modifications. And there's lots of different ways we can modify an exercise and lots of different ways that we can find an entry point. Number one is like reducing range of motion or modifying the range of motion, which I did. I can squat high bar. I got those Asian genes. So I can do like, you know, heels touching high bar squat, ass to grass without butt wink, right? So that's how much depth that's how much mobility I have. But I cut my depth to about 2 inches above parallel. That reduced the range of motion that I had to go through, cut out the longest range of motion at the bottom where the adductors at times are actually most switched on in the squat. So I reduced the range of motion. Then I added a tempo, which was 3 seconds down. I also paused, which that alongside not having a belt on just forced me to lift less weight. Now you're not going to lift as much with a tempo and without a belt. So it forced me down to about like 90 to 110 kilograms here for, you know, the rep range that I was in. And I was RPP 3 and under. I found my entry point with the squat. Okay, I'd done the same thing for deadlift. I'd done the same thing for my accessory movements. Like what can we do? For example, on my split squat, I used to do Bulgarians all the time, where I had like 2 feet up, getting extra range of motion. Whereas my modification for the split squat was I would do a static lunge on the floor and I would lunge to like a small sponge box. So it reduced my range of motion again. I added in a bit of a tempo and I found that entry point at 3 and under. Whereas if I went into a regular Bulgarian split squat at the time, you know, I'm going up over a 6 or 7 out of 10 on that RPP. Right, so step number 1 is you got to find your entry point. You have to find in your program and what you're doing, what actually hurts, like what is sore to do, right? It's really, really simple. That's the first thing we need to find. From here, we need to work on a way to find an entry point from this. You have to find out the modifications that you're going to make to the lifts. And like I said, it doesn't mean completely back off. You know, like I didn't completely back off because I couldn't low bar squat again. I went to high bar tempo, pausing above that parallel. So these things allowed me to train. From this entry point, that is where you actually progress through your weeks and through your blocks by decreasing the amount of modifications you've made to that entry point. So for example, my high bar beltless with a tempo, stopping 2 inches above parallel. The following block, I put a belt on. The following block after that, I took the tempo away. The following block after that, I went to parallel and a wee bit deeper. And that was 3 to 4 blocks of progression, you know, between 4 and 6 weeks per block. By the end of that, my adductor was essentially fully healed. Okay, like there was no pain there. I worked my way through all these variations and I managed this rate of kind of this scale of 10. And that's the key word I just mentioned there as well, is like the whole, you know, method of managing this. It's like RPE. So RPE is there to give you the chance to auto-regulate in the gym based on how you're feeling on a given day. Okay. It's the same with RPP. You get bad days, you get good days, you know, you have to go with the flow. You have to listen to your body when you're in, and you have to be very disciplined in that, like, if you start to notice fluctuations in the scale, that you have to take action. So entry point, we've found our entry point, we've modified our exercises, we've maybe reduced the frequency in our training program, or, you know, we've cut range of motion on our main lifts. We've cut out exercises or modified the ones that hurt, and we've found that entry point now. You've got a program that lets you train at a 3 out of 10 and under. That's step one. Step two now is understanding that you do have a threshold. And there's a couple of different ways that we want to monitor and be very in tune with this threshold. And that is knowing that your threshold is about a 3 to 5, right? So I've put 3 to 4 here just to be kind of really on the good side, but like 3 to 5 is like your threshold or your cap that you don't want to be exceeding. And there's a couple of different instances and there's a couple of different times where you don't want to exceed this. Number one is rep to rep. You have to be tuned in. Like I have had a very close friends of mine. I've been in the gym at the same time watching them rupture a quad under 140 kilogram squat, which was a warm up at the time. Rupture, like straight up. And it was like rep 3 of a warm up. You know, it's like things like this teach you that it's not just day to day or week to week. It's rep to rep. You have to be in tune with your body and in tune with how you're feeling. So if you notice that your entry point at a 3 or under jumps to a 4, and then it jumps to a 5 or like a 6 from rep 1 to 4 of a set of 5 or 6, you are wrecking the bar on that rep 4. Like you aren't going any further. You're noticing these escalations, these jumps in RPP mid-set. That's a red flag. We do not want that, okay? We have to stay within this threshold of 3 to 4, maybe 5, depending on who you are and how hardcore you are and how much injuries you've had, how seasoned you are to be in pain, essentially. But yeah, rep to rep is the first place we kind of monitor and think, right, if it's going from 3 to a 5 within 1 or 2 reps, we want to call it here on this session. The second place is set to set in the exact same way that we manage that rep to rep aspect. It's between sets. Is this pain getting worse? Am I making this worse by doing this exercise set to set? If so, that just means we've exceeded that tolerance. We're doing too much. And that's the key. We have found our entry point. That's step one from an entry point in terms of like that's exercise prescription. But in terms of the total stress and the total stress that you're getting per session and per week, we also do have a threshold to that. And this is where we're kind of looking at that in between sets. If you are working out and you have 3 or 4 or 5 sets of a main lift and in between sets, you're staying within your entry point. You're staying that 3 to 4 and under, you're fine. But if you're noticing that go to a 5 or 6 or 7 in between sets and it's getting worse, it's information that the plan that you're running is not suiting you right now. You've exceeded the capacity that you have, the tissue capacity that you have at the joints, at the tissues that are sore. That capacity has been exceeded with the amount of stress that you're actually doing in that training program. Okay, so we have to come back down to a stage where you're recovering and not exceeding that capacity. So it's just information. Again, people will get very disheartened with pain in mid-set, mid-session and stuff, which is understandable. And it's very hard to go through, but at the end of the day, it's just information and you have to utilize it to the best of your ability. So we understand that we have to go rep to rep. We understand we go set to set. The next place we go is day to day, session to session, week to week. So it's like, if we are noticing the day after a training session that your pain has spiked to a 6 or a 7, same concept applies. That threshold has been exceeded. The training stress that we are running is just too much. If we're noticing week to week, we're not seeing improvements and it's going 3 to 4, 4 to 5, again, we have to reassess. Do we reassess the program in terms of the total amount of stress that you're running, which is like your volume and the intensity? And we need to know where those caps are. That's a very important thing. So with your program, with what you're running on a weekly basis, you're going to have a threshold on how much volume you can manage and how much intensity you can manage. So from an intensity standpoint, as I said, I had a threshold of about 140 kilograms to the point where it's like after 140 kilograms, I got sharp pain. It was sore, very sore. Those modifications took me down to about 110 kilograms on a high bar squat, and that worked really well for me. I was about a 3 out of 10. So my intensity cap was around that 140 kilograms. Now the same thing goes for volume. I might be able to handle 9 sets on squats per week. Someone else might be able to handle 15 sets on squats a week. You'll know if you exceed that threshold. You just have to drop down on training stress and find that, again, that entry point and that place where we can be at the 3 and under and go from there. So it is a weekly monitoring job where you have to just monitor things on a weekly basis and adapt the program based on the result that you're actually getting out of it. So that's a very important thing. And then we also look at externals and stress. Like these things still play a massive, part, which I'm going to cover in a future video. We're going to be looking over stress, digestion, sleep, all the good stuff, but that is another point. So we need to understand that when we're tracking this, we're being diligent with it. And most importantly, like any metric, It's not that we take a single metric to heart. I think that's an important thing to say. It's like I said, don't take the single sessions as the be all end all. Don't get too caught up in the weeds on one bad session or one good session. You know, like take that weekly, that monthly average of the trend, right? And we need to be seeing a downward trend on this. So if someone's got that entry point at 3 to 4, I want to be seeing that go 2 to 3, 1 to 2 over the course of a couple of training blocks. We need to be getting out of pain, not just training around pain. Training around pain is the short to medium term fix that you do to keep you training unrestricted. Okay? Long term, we want to get out of pain. And that's where we got to be seeing this downward trend. And that's where the overall programming structure and what exercise selection you have, and how you're actually rehabbing the injury in the background will obviously play a big dividends into that. So yeah, that is the main things that we want to be aware of. So that is it really for episode 2. It's how we track pain. We use the RPP scale. We use it on a set to set, rep to rep, day to day, and a weekly basis. We track that RPP very religiously. We look for the trends up and down, and we use that as feedback to our program and for our exercise selection. Exercise selection either is not working and we need further modifications to reduce the load, range of motion, intensity overall, or we need programming adjustments as a whole. There's too much stress, there's too much volume, there's too much intensity, there's too much redundancy. I might have too much hip flexion back to back in the space of 3 to 4 days that I'm just exceeding the capacity of what that tissue and that joint, that is sore, can handle right now. So it is all information, and on a week to week basis is what I do for all my clients at VICI is like, we go bottoms up on this 100%. We go week to week, we take the data and the feedback and the result that we've got in one specific week. We look at what we've done, we look at the response we've got, we make the adjustments that we need for the following week to keep that trend going in the direction that we want, or to get away from the trend if it's actually bad. So yeah, hope you all found this helpful. That is part 2 of 7, another 5 to go. And like I said, we've got some really interesting topics here. I actually tried to record this video a couple of weeks back and do all 7 parts in one video, and it ended up about I stopped recording about 40 minutes and just wasted 40 minutes of my time. It was going to be about a 3-hour video, so I was like, nope, I'll condense this down, we'll get a 7-part series out of it. And yeah, hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions at all on any of this type of stuff, I love talking to people, or talking about this stuff to people. I love helping people in this situation. This is stuff that I am super, super interested in, super passionate about, stuff that I've spent over a decade now learning and investing in. And we get some pretty sick results with a lot of athletes here at VICI. So if you have any questions, pop it in the comment section or send me a message on Instagram. I'm always down for a chat. And yeah, hit the like button, subscribe to this video if you enjoyed, and keep your eyes open for the next one. So thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.